On a cold December morning, New York City lay under a thin layer of frost. The streets were alive with activity, but the icy wind slicing through the corners made the bustling city feel even chillier. James, a middle-aged millionaire, hurried along, focused on the important business meeting awaiting him. His mind was consumed with numbers and deals, as usual. Known for his determination, James carried an air of seriousness, his expression rarely betraying the weight he bore despite his success. As he crossed a busy downtown intersection, something unexpected caught his attention. Sitting on the sidewalk was a young girl, frail and dressed in visibly worn-out clothes, clutching a small plastic cup. Her large, tired eyes watched the stream of passers-by with a mix of desperation and resignation. Normally, James wouldn't have noticed, but this time, an unfamiliar tightness gripped his chest. He tried to avert his gaze but found himself slowing down, unable to ignore the scene. In an uncharacteristic move, James stopped in front of her. "Hi," he said softly, surprising even himself. "What's your name?" The girl looked up cautiously, her voice barely audible over the city's noise. "Lily," she whispered. Something about her vulnerability stirred emotions James couldn't quite place. He wasn't the type to be driven by emotion. His life had always been guided by logic and control. Yet here he was, captivated by a child sitting in the cold. "What are you doing here, Lily?" he asked, already sensing the answer would be as harsh as the biting wind. "I'm cold and hungry," she replied, her gaze dropping as if ashamed to admit it. For a moment, James stood frozen. Lily's fragile state reminded him of something buried deep in his past, something he had long tried to forget. Acting on an impulse he couldn't explain, he crouched beside her. "Come with me," he said, holding out his hand. "Let's get you somewhere warm, and I'll find you something to eat." Lily hesitated. She had grown used to empty promises, but something about James's voice made her trust him. Slowly, she reached for his hand, and he gently helped her to her feet. As they walked through the city streets, James's mind churned with questions. Why was he doing this? A man like him, so consumed by business, was now setting aside everything to help a stranger. Yet, as he glanced at Lily, he felt certain that this moment was more important than anything else on his schedule. They arrived at James's apartment, a sleek and spacious home that, despite its luxury, always felt cold and empty. Lily's eyes widened as she stepped inside, her amazement evident. James led her to the living room, turned on the heater, and wrapped her in a soft blanket. "Sit down," he said gently. "I'll get you something to eat." In the kitchen, as he prepared a simple meal, James felt an inexplicable shift within himself. This vulnerable child seemed to awaken emotions and memories he had locked away. When he returned to the living room, Lily was curled up in the blanket, staring out the window with a distant expression. "Here you go," James said, handing her the plate. "Eat slowly. You're safe now." Lily took the plate with trembling hands and began to eat, her hunger evident. James sat nearby, silently watching her, feeling a growing need to understand her story. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. Lily paused, her eyes filling with tears as she looked away. "My dad. He left me here in the city," she said, her voice breaking. "He and my mom had a big fight, and he just abandoned me." She clutched the blanket tightly, as if trying to shield herself from the pain. James felt his heart ache. Her words struck a chord, bringing back memories of his own childhood, memories he had worked hard to forget. Looking at Lily, James saw himself in her vulnerability. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly, his voice filled with an emotion he rarely showed. For the first time in years, James felt a purpose beyond the confines of his work, a desire to protect and help someone who needed him. "Lily," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm going to help you." What James didn't realize at that moment was how this small act of kindness would soon transform his life in ways he could never have predicted. The warmth of James's apartment slowly began to ease the cold from Lily's fragile body. As she finished the last bite of her meal, her shoulders relaxed slightly, a subtle shift that didn't escape James's notice. He studied her closely, seeing the deep sadness in her eyes, a sorrow far too heavy for someone her age. "Do you feel better now?" James asked gently, careful not to push too hard, too soon. Lily nodded, though her gaze stayed fixed on the floor. "Yes, thank you for everything." The formal tone in her response made James feel a pang of discomfort. It was as if she was trying to maintain a protective distance, a barrier against the harsh world she had come to know. He leaned forward slightly, softening his voice even more. "You don't have to call me Sir, Lily. My name is James. You can talk to me. I'm here to help." Lily hesitated, her small hands gripping the edges of the blanket as though it was her lifeline. It was clear she was torn between keeping her pain hidden or letting it out. Finally, after a long silence, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "It's been really hard since my dad left," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "He and my mom fought all the time. I didn't understand everything they argued about, but I knew it was bad. One night they had a big fight. I heard my mom crying, and then he just left. He took me with him, but after a few days in the city, he left me here." James's heart clenched as Lily's words painted a picture of abandonment and fear. The tremble in her voice revealed the depth of her trauma. He could feel the weight of her experiences as if they were his own. Memories from his own childhood began to resurface. Memories of his father's cold words and unrelenting expectations. Pushing those thoughts aside, he focused on the girl in front of him. "And your mom?" James asked carefully, not wanting to upset her further. Lily shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't know where she is. My dad wouldn't let me talk to her. He said she didn't care about me anymore." Her voice broke, and she clutched the blanket tighter. "But I don't believe him. I don't want to believe him." James leaned back, processing the gravity of her situation. This wasn't just a case of a lost child. Lily had been torn apart by the very people who were supposed to love and protect her. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he said softly. "No one should have to go through what you've been through." Lily wiped her tears with the back of her hand, sniffling quietly. "It's not your fault," she murmured. "You've been so kind to me. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." James gave her a faint, sad smile. "I'm helping you because you deserve it, Lily. You deserve to be safe, to be cared for, and I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're okay." For a moment, the room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the heater. Lily looked up at James, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge whether she could truly trust him. Whatever she saw in his expression seemed to reassure her, because, at last, she nodded. A small, hopeful smile broke through her tears. "Okay," she whispered. James felt a wave of emotion, a mix of relief and determination. He had made a promise to Lily, and he was resolved to keep it. But as he watched her curl up on the couch, another thought began to take shape in his mind. He couldn't just help her in the short term. This child needed more than a warm meal and a place to rest. She needed a future, a chance to rebuild her life. And James was beginning to realize that he was willing to be the one to help her find it. James realized he needed to find Lily's mother. Understanding what had truly happened between her parents was the only way to give Lily the safety and stability she deserved. But as much as the plan made sense, James couldn't shake the unease growing within him. Something told him this search would uncover far more pain and complexity than he was prepared for. Still, he knew there was no turning back now. He had already stepped into Lily's world, and he wasn't about to leave her alone in it. "Lily," he said softly, breaking the silence, "I'm going to help you find your mom. We'll figure this out together, okay?" Lily's eyes widened, her face a mix of fear and hope. "Do you think we can really find her?" she asked, her voice trembling. James nodded firmly. "I do, and I won't stop until we do." As the words left his lips, James felt a deep sense of resolve settle over him. This wasn't just about helping Lily anymore. It was about confronting his own ghosts, about healing wounds he had buried for years. Somehow, helping this young girl felt like the first step toward fixing something broken inside himself. Night fell over New York City, its usual buzz quieting as the streets emptied. In James's apartment, the atmosphere had shifted. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her small frame curled up under a thick blanket. Her breathing was steady, but even in sleep, her face carried a shadow of sadness that tugged at James's heart. Sitting in an armchair across from her, James watched her for a moment, his mind swirling with the weight of her story. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this situation was deeply familiar, that it resonated with something from his own life. Memories he had worked hard to suppress began to resurface, unbidden and unwelcome. He closed his eyes, trying to push the thoughts away, but it was no use. The past had a way of sneaking in, especially when he least expected it. Suddenly, he was back in his childhood home, a grand estate that should have been warm and inviting, but always felt cold and oppressive. The long hallways echoed with voices that rarely spoke of anything kind or encouraging. His father's presence loomed large in every room, even when he wasn't there. A stern and controlling man, his father had filled James's life with relentless pressure and constant criticism. James could still hear his father's harsh voice in his mind. "Don't disappoint me, James. You have to be the best. Anything less is a failure." No matter how hard he worked, it was never enough. An A on a report card wasn't good enough. It should have been an A+. Excelling in sports didn't matter because there was always someone better. It wasn't love that drove his father. It was control, a suffocating need to mold James into an image of perfection. Opening his eyes, James felt his chest tighten with the familiar anxiety those memories brought. Even after all these years, his father's words still had the power to hurt him. He had spent his life trying to escape that shadow, building his own empire and his own wealth just to prove he could succeed without his father. But the success had come at a cost he was only now beginning to understand. Looking over at Lily, James felt a pang of sadness. He wondered if she had felt the same way, judged, pressured, or made to feel like she wasn't enough. Had her parents, the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally, failed her as his father had failed him? The thought made him angry at the world and at the injustices children like Lily were forced to endure. But it also made him determined. James couldn't change his own past, but he could do something about Lily's future. He could be the person who told her she was enough, just as she was. He could be the one who stood by her, who protected her, who made sure she knew she was loved and cared for. As the hours passed, James found himself pacing the room, his thoughts bouncing between the memories of his childhood and the present. He thought about the arguments he'd had with his father, the moments he had wanted to speak up but hadn't dared. He remembered the times he had been too afraid to stand his ground, too scared of the consequences. Now, as he looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let her feel that same fear or helplessness. He didn't just want to help her, he needed to. For her, and maybe even for himself. James couldn't forget the night that had haunted him for years. He was 12, seated at the dinner table with his parents. His father, as usual, dominated the conversation, speaking about the family business and how James would one day take over. "You have to be prepared to make sacrifices," his father had said. James listened quietly, as he always did, until his father said something that struck a nerve. "You have to be ruthless in this world, James. Compassion is a weakness. If you want to succeed, you can't let emotions get in the way." James looked up then, something inside him breaking. Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, "But what if I don't want to be like you?" His voice trembled with both fear and defiance. The room fell silent. His father stared at him, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he set down his fork and knife, folding his hands neatly on the table. "Excuse me?" his father said, his voice calm, but dangerously so. James knew he had made a mistake, but he couldn't take it back. His heart pounded in his chest, yet he stood his ground. "I don't want to be ruthless," he said, quieter now, but still firm. "I don't want to hurt people just to get what I want." For a moment, his father said nothing. Then, with a cold, calculated smile, he leaned back in his chair. "You're weak, James," he said, his tone dripping with disappointment. "And that's why you'll never be good enough." Those words had stayed with James, shaping every decision he made. He had vowed never to be weak, never to let anyone see the cracks in his armor. But now, as he looked at Lily sleeping peacefully on the couch, he realized those walls he had built to protect himself had also kept everyone out, including himself. He took a deep breath, the weight of his memories pressing down on him. Instead of pushing them away as he usually did, he let them settle. He knew he needed to confront his past if he was going to help Lily with hers. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the windows, James made a decision. He would find Lily's mother. Yes, that was important. But more than that, he would face his own demons and the unresolved pain he had carried for so long. He couldn't let the past control him anymore. It was time to take his life back. Walking over to the couch, he gently pulled the blanket back over Lily, who had shifted in her sleep. She murmured something softly, and James paused, watching her for a moment. A strange mix of sadness, hope, and determination filled his heart. "Sleep well, Lily," he whispered. "Things are going to get better, I promise." As he turned away, ready to face the challenges ahead, he couldn't help but wonder if, in helping Lily, he might finally find the peace he had been searching for all his life. The early morning sun bathed New York City in a soft golden light, but James barely noticed as he moved through the quiet streets. His mind was focused on the task at hand, finding Lily's mother. He had spent the morning making calls, leveraging the vast network of connections he had built over the years, tracking down any information about Sarah, the woman who had once been Lily's anchor. The search led him to a small, run-down neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The buildings were weathered, their paint peeling, and the streets carried the quiet hum of a community that had seen better days. Walking through the area, James felt a creeping unease, as if he were about to uncover something deeply painful, something better left buried. Finally, he arrived at the address he'd been given. It was an aging apartment building, its fire escapes rusted and its windows grimy. Standing at the entrance, James hesitated, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He had faced boardrooms full of corporate giants and negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But this felt different. This was personal. Gathering his resolve, he pushed open the door and climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor. There, he found the door he was looking for, apartment 2B. It was slightly ajar, and James hesitated again before knocking softly. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice echoing faintly in the narrow hallway. "Sarah, are you there?" For a moment, there was no response. Then, the door creaked open wider, revealing a woman who looked as though she had endured a lifetime of hardship. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes worn, and her eyes carried a deep sadness, one that seemed to have settled there long ago. James stood frozen, taking in the sight of her. This was Sarah, the woman whose story he had yet to understand, and the key to giving Lily the future she deserved. "James?" Sarah's voice was a mix of surprise and confusion. What are you doing here?" James stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't seen Sarah in years, not since their paths diverged after high school. Despite the time that had passed, there was no mistaking her. She was the same girl he had once cared for deeply, though time had clearly taken its toll. "I'm here about Lily," James said gently, his tone firm but kind. "She's in trouble, Sarah. She needs you." At the mention of Lily's name, Sarah's expression shifted. Fear flickered across her face as she opened the door fully, motioning for James to step inside. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, with just the essentials. It was clear Sarah had been struggling, scraping by however she could. The weight of years of hardship was visible in her posture, in the way she moved. James could see the exhaustion etched into her every gesture. She's okay?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she shut the door behind him. I thought she was with her father." James nodded, but his expression was grim. "She was," he said. "But he abandoned her, Sarah. He left her on the streets with nothing. I found her yesterday, begging for food. She needs you. She needs her mother." Sarah sank into a chair, her face pale, stricken with guilt. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know he would do that. I thought he would at least take care of her, but I should have known better." James watched her closely, reading the pain in her eyes, the regret that seemed to hang over her like a heavy shadow. But beneath the guilt, he saw something else, something that gave him hope. "Sarah," he said softly, taking a seat across from her. "I know things have been hard for you, but Lily needs you now, more than ever. She's been through so much, and she's scared. She needs to know she's not alone, that she still has someone who loves her." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she looked at him. "I've made so many mistakes, James," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I was doing what was best for her, but I was wrong. I was so wrong." James reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. "It's not too late, Sarah," he said. "You can still be there for her. We can find a way to make this right." For a long moment, Sarah didn't say anything. She stared at their hands, lost in thought. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "You're right. I have to do this, for Lily." Relief washed over James. It wasn't going to be easy, none of this was. But Sarah's willingness to try was a start. "I'll take you to her," he said, standing. "She's at my apartment. She's safe, but she's been through a lot. Seeing you will mean the world to her." Sarah stood as well, though her movements were hesitant, almost as if she were afraid of what lay ahead. I don't know if she'll want to see me," she said quietly. "After everything that's happened?" "She will," James said firmly. "She's your daughter, Sarah. She needs you more than anything." The two left the apartment and made their way to James's car. Sarah remained quiet, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. James didn't push her to talk. He knew the situation was overwhelming for her, and he wanted to give her the space to process it all. The drive back to James's apartment was tense, the silence thick with unspoken emotions. As they neared their destination, James glanced over at Sarah. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap, betraying her anxiety. "Sarah," he said gently as he pulled up in front of the building. "You can do this. Lily needs to see that you're here for her." Sarah took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "I know," she murmured. I'm scared, James. I don't want to let her down again." "You won't," James assured her, his voice steady. "You're here now, and that's what matters." They stepped out of the car and made their way into the building. With each step, James could feel the tension rising, but he knew they were doing the right thing. He unlocked the door and led Sarah inside. Lily was sitting on the couch, her eyes fixed on the television, though it was clear she wasn't paying attention. When the door opened, she turned, her eyes widening as they landed on Sarah. "Mom?" Lily's voice was small, uncertain, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Sarah took a hesitant step forward, her voice trembling. "It's me, sweetheart. I'm here." For a moment, Lily just stood there, staring at her mother as if trying to process what was happening. Then, without warning, she leapt up from the couch and ran into Sarah's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Sarah held her tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered soothing words into Lily's hair. James stood by the doorway, watching the emotional reunion with his heart swelling. He knew this was only the start of a long and challenging journey for both of them, but in this moment, he allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal. The room was filled with the soft sounds of Sarah comforting Lily, her whispered reassurances blending with the faint hum of the city outside. James stayed back, giving them space, but the emotions swirling inside him were overwhelming. Watching Lily cling to her mother, her small frame trembling with emotion, stirred something deep within him. Feelings he hadn't expected, a mixture of foreign and familiar. As time passed, Sarah gently led Lily back to the couch. They sat close together, their hands tightly clasped, as if afraid to let go. James remained near the doorway, observing the scene unfold, his mind racing. He had come here to help reunite Lily with her mother, but now something deeper was gnawing at him, something he couldn't quite put into words. Lily looked up at Sarah, her voice trembling. "Mom, why did Dad leave me? What did I do wrong?" Sarah's face crumpled with visible pain. She shook her head and pulled Lily closer. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Your father? He made a terrible mistake. None of this is your fault." James felt a sharp pang in his chest as he listened. He had always prided himself on staying detached, on keeping his emotions in check. But now, he found himself struggling to maintain his composure. Something about the way Sarah spoke, the way she held Lily, felt as though she was hiding something important. As if sensing his thoughts, Sarah looked up at James. Her eyes held a mix of gratitude and something else, something he couldn't quite read. She hesitated for a moment before speaking again, her voice low and uncertain. "James, there's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." The room seemed to grow quieter, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. James's heart began to pound as his mind raced through countless possibilities. He could see the fear in Sarah's eyes, the way she gripped Lily's hand for strength. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze flickering between James and Lily. "James, Lily's father isn't who you think he is. He's not some man I met after high school. He's you." For a moment, everything froze. James stared at Sarah, his mind struggling to process her words. It felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, as though his entire reality had been turned upside down. "I'm Lily's father?" The words escaped him in a whisper, as though saying them aloud would make them real. Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, James, she's your daughter. I found out I was pregnant a few months after we reconnected that one night. But by then, you'd already left for college, and I didn't know how to tell you. So I didn't." A rush of emotions hit James all at once. Shock, disbelief, anger, and something else. Something raw and overwhelming that he couldn't name. He turned to look at Lily, who was staring at him with wide, confused eyes. "Dad?" Lily's voice was small, trembling with uncertainty. James took a step closer, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. "Lily, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Lily looked up at him, her eyes brimming with a mix of fear and fragile hope. "You're really my dad?" James knelt in front of her, his voice breaking. "Yes, Lily, I'm your dad, and I promise, I'm never going to leave you again." James knelt in front of Lily, his hands trembling as he gently took her small hands in his. "Yes, Lily," he said, his voice soft but full of emotion. "I'm your dad. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Lily stared at him, her teary eyes searching his face, trying to find the truth in his words. Slowly, as if finally believing him, she leaned forward and wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. James hugged her close, his heart swelling with an overwhelming emotion he had never experienced before. Pure, unconditional love. Holding her tiny frame in his arms, he felt a sense of completeness he hadn't known he was missing. This was his daughter, his flesh and blood. The thought of her enduring so much pain and abandonment broke something deep inside him. He silently vowed to never let her feel that way again. Sarah stood nearby, her face streaked with tears, but there was a glimmer of relief in her eyes. After years of carrying the weight of her secret, it was finally out in the open. "I'm so sorry, James," she said softly. "I should have told you sooner, but I was scared. I didn't know how you'd react, and then everything got so complicated with the man she thought was her father." James looked up at her, still holding Lily tightly. His voice was calm but resolute. "I understand, Sarah, but now that I know, things are going to change. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together, for her and for us." Lily pulled back slightly, her wide, tear-filled eyes meeting his. "Are you really going to stay, Dad? You won't leave me like he did?" James's heart broke at the fear and uncertainty in her voice. He cupped her cheek gently, his gaze steady and full of conviction. "I'm not going anywhere, Lily. I promise. You're my daughter, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Lily's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief. She buried her face in his chest, clinging to him as if afraid he might disappear. James held her close, his arms wrapped protectively around her, feeling the weight of his new reality settling over him. He was a father to this brave, beautiful little girl who had endured so much already. Sarah watched the two of them, her own tears falling, but there was hope in her expression. She had been afraid of this moment for so long, but now, seeing James and Lily together, she realized it was the beginning of something new, a chance for all of them to heal. As the three of them sat together in the quiet apartment, James knew his life had been irrevocably changed. For years, he had focused on building his fortune, amassing wealth and power, thinking that was all that mattered. But none of it meant anything compared to the fragile family in front of him, the daughter he had just discovered, and the woman who had once been the love of his life. James took a deep breath, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. There were countless challenges ahead, decisions to make, and wounds to heal. But for the first time in years, he felt a true sense of purpose, a reason to fight, to protect, and to love. He glanced at Sarah, who gave him a small, hopeful smile through her tears, and then at Lily, who was still clinging to him as if afraid to let go. James felt a surge of determination rise within him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but as long as they were together, he knew they could face anything. "We're going to be okay," James said softly, his voice steady with resolve. "We're a family now, and nothing is going to change that." Lily nodded against his chest, her small hands clutching his shirt tightly. "I love you, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling but filled with sincerity. James felt tears prick his eyes as he hugged her even closer. "I love you too, Lily, more than anything." As they sat there, holding each other close, James couldn't help but feel this was the start of something new, something better. He had spent years chasing success, thinking it would bring him fulfillment, but now he realized that what he had truly been searching for was this: a family to love and protect. The revelation of his fatherhood had shaken him to his core, but it had also ignited something powerful within him. A fierce determination to be the father Lily deserved and the partner Sarah needed. The days ahead would be a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. But James knew one thing for certain: he was ready to face it all. He looked down at Lily, who was beginning to relax in his arms, and then at Sarah, who gave him another small smile. They had lost so much along the way, but they had also found something they never expected: a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to be a family. Lily needed him to be fully present, but James knew he couldn't give her that unless he confronted the man who had shaped so much of his life, the man whose harsh words and relentless expectations still echoed in his mind. This confrontation was something he had avoided for years, but now it felt inevitable. If he was going to break free of his father's influence and truly be the parent Lily needed, he had to face him. It was a cold afternoon when James finally made the decision. He paced the length of his living room, the phone clutched in his hand, debating whether he was ready for this. In the next room, Sarah and Lily were playing a board game they had found in a closet. Their laughter was light and carefree, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. With a deep breath, James dialed the number. The phone rang only once, before a familiar, stern voice answered. "James," his father said, his tone as cold and commanding as ever. "It's been a long time." James clenched his jaw, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "It has," he replied, his heart pounding. "We need to talk. In person." There was a brief silence on the other end, and James could almost picture his father's calculating expression, wondering what had prompted this unexpected call. Finally, his father spoke. "Very well. Come to the house tomorrow afternoon." James agreed, his chest tightening as he hung up. It had been years since he'd stepped foot in his father's house, not since he'd walked away from that life, determined to build something on his own terms. The thought of returning now, of facing the man who had cast such a long shadow over his life, filled him with equal parts dread and resolve. The next day, James drove to the family estate, the place where he had grown up. The drive was long, and memories came rushing back. Memories of a childhood dominated by impossible expectations, of a boy taught to see emotions as weaknesses and success as the only measure of worth. The estate was just as he remembered it, grand and imposing, with sprawling gardens that had always felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. As he pulled up to the front entrance, James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Inside, his father was waiting in the study, a room heavy with the scent of old leather and faint traces of cigar smoke. The moment James stepped through the door, the familiar weight of the past settled over him. His father sat behind a massive oak desk, his expression unreadable, but his sharp eyes assessing James with the same intensity as always. "James," his father said, not bothering to stand, "what brings you back after all this time?" James closed the door behind him, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I'm not here to make small talk," he said, his voice firm. "I'm here because there are things we need to address, things that have been left unresolved for far too long." His father raised an eyebrow, a faint glimmer of amusement flickering across his face, as though he found James's defiance entertaining. "Oh? And what might those be?" James stepped forward, his anger simmering just below the surface. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "The way you treated me. The way you controlled every part of my life. I spent my entire childhood trying to live up to your impossible standards, and no matter what I did, it was never enough." His father remained calm, his demeanor almost indifferent, as though he'd heard this all before. "I pushed you because I saw your potential, James," he said, his tone measured. "I wanted to make sure you didn't waste it. Look at you now. A successful man. A millionaire. I'd say my methods worked." James's hands tightened into fists, his frustration spilling over. "Your methods? You call breaking me down and making me feel worthless methods? You didn't push me because you believed in me. You pushed me because you wanted control, because you couldn't stand the idea of me being anything other than what you wanted me to be." For the first time, a flicker of something, perhaps annoyance or defensiveness, crossed his father's face. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cool but clipped. "Everything I did was for your own good." James shook his head, stepping closer to the desk. "No," he said firmly. "Everything you did was for yourself. You wanted me to be a reflection of you, to carry on your legacy, no matter what it cost me. But I'm not you. I never wanted to be you." The room fell silent, the weight of James's words hanging heavily in the air. His father leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "You came all this way just to blame me for your problems?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You've made your choices, James. If you're unhappy, that's on you." James took a deep breath, his anger subsiding just enough for clarity to take hold. "I didn't come here to blame you," he said quietly. "I came here to let go. I've spent too much of my life trying to prove something to you, trying to earn your approval. But I don't need it anymore. I have a daughter now, a family, and I'm not going to make the same mistakes you did. I'm here to break this cycle, once and for all." For a moment, his father said nothing. Then, with a slight nod, he turned his gaze away, as if dismissing the conversation. "If that's what you needed to say, then I've heard it." James stared at him for a moment longer, then nodded. He didn't need anything more from his father. Not an apology, not understanding. He had said his piece, and that was enough. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the study, leaving the heavy atmosphere of the estate behind him. As he stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, James felt lighter. The grip his father had held over him for so many years was finally broken. He wasn't the scared, desperate boy he used to be. He was a father now, a man determined to create a better life for Lily, one built on love, not fear. With renewed purpose, James got into his car and drove away, leaving the past where it belonged. It was time to focus on the future. James nearly spat the words, his anger bubbling over. "You turned me into a shell of a person. I spent my whole life trying to prove myself to you, trying to become the person you wanted me to be. But in the process, I lost who I really was." His father finally stood, his movements slow and deliberate as he walked around the desk to face James. "Is that what you think?" he asked, his tone cold but controlled. "That I did all of this to break you? You're stronger because of it. You learned to be ruthless, to prioritize success over sentiment. That's how you've survived in this world." James shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Survived? I barely lived. I shut myself off from everyone, afraid to show any weakness. Afraid that if I let anyone in, they'd see I wasn't the perfect son you demanded I be." His father's eyes narrowed slightly, the first hint of emotion breaking through his stoic exterior. "And what are you now, James? Some sentimental fool who thinks emotions will get him ahead in life? Is that what this is about?" "This isn't about business or success," James snapped, his voice rising with frustration. "This is about family, about what it means to actually care about someone, to protect them, not because they're an asset, but because they're a part of you. I have a daughter, and I'm not going to make the same mistakes with her that you made with me." His father's expression faltered for a moment, as if the mention of a grandchild had caught him off guard. "A daughter?" he asked, his voice softer now, though still tinged with skepticism. "Yes, a daughter," James said firmly. "And she's everything to me. I'm not going to raise her the way you raised me, constantly afraid that I'm not enough. I'm going to show her that she's loved and valued for who she is, not just for what she can achieve." For a long moment, his father stared at him, the tension in the room so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, slowly, his father sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. It was the first time James had ever seen him show any sign of vulnerability. "I suppose I've made mistakes," his father admitted, his voice low and measured. "I did what I thought was right, what I thought would make you strong. But perhaps I was wrong." James was stunned. He had spent his entire life seeing his father as unyielding, incapable of admitting fault. Yet here he was, conceding, if only slightly, that his approach had been flawed. "I don't need your apologies," James said after a pause, his voice softening. "But I do need you to understand that things are different now. I'm not that scared little boy anymore. I'm a father now, and I'm going to do things my way." His father nodded slowly, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting James's again. There was a faint, almost wistful smile on his face. "You've grown, James. You've become your own man. I suppose that's all I ever wanted." For the first time in his life, James felt a sense of closure. The power his father had held over him for so many years was slipping away. He wasn't the person his father had tried to mold him into, and that was okay. He was something else, something better. He was a father who would protect his daughter with everything he had. Without another word, James turned and walked away, leaving the study and the weight of his father's expectations behind him. As he stepped outside into the crisp air, he felt lighter. The man he had once feared no longer had control over him. He was free to focus on what truly mattered: his family, his daughter, and the new life he was determined to build. James turned and walked out of the study, the weight on his shoulders feeling lighter with every step. He had confronted his past, faced the man who had influenced so much of his life, and now he was free to move forward. As he drove back to his apartment, back to Lily and Sarah, a sense of peace settled over him. He had done what needed to be done. Now, he could focus on what truly mattered: the future he was determined to build with his daughter and the woman he had once loved. When he walked through the door of his apartment, Lily was the first to greet him. Her face lit up with pure joy as she ran into his arms. James scooped her up, holding her tightly, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "We're going to be just fine." And for the first time in a long time, he truly believed it. The days following the confrontation with Lily's former guardian were filled with a tense, uneasy calm. James couldn't shake the feeling that the man's departure was only temporary, a lull before the storm. The haunting words, "You haven't seen the last of me," echoed in his mind, a constant reminder that the threat wasn't gone. But rather than letting fear consume him, James used it to strengthen his resolve. He would do whatever it took to protect Lily and Sarah. Over the next few days, James quietly worked to reinforce their security. He installed new locks on the doors, added security cameras, and even consulted a lawyer to begin the process of obtaining a restraining order. He left nothing to chance. Every night, he meticulously checked that the windows were locked and the alarm system was armed before finally allowing himself to rest. But physical security wasn't his only concern. James knew that Lily's emotional well-being was just as fragile, just as important. The recent confrontation had brought back fears she had only just started to leave behind. She was quieter than usual, her bright, playful energy dimmed by the uncertainty that had crept back into her life. One evening, after a particularly subdued dinner, James decided it was time to address what had been weighing on her. Lily was curled up on the couch with a book, but her distant gaze made it clear she wasn't reading. Her thoughts were elsewhere. James sat down beside her, his heart aching at the sight of her so withdrawn. "Hey, Lily," he said softly, trying to catch her eye. "Do you want to talk about what's on your mind?" Lily glanced up at him, her expression hesitant. She closed her book and leaned into him, seeking comfort in his presence. "Is he really gone, Dad? Is he going to come back?" she asked, her voice trembling. James wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "He's gone, sweetheart, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure he doesn't come near us again. I promise you, you're safe here." Lily nodded, but the worry in her eyes lingered. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "What if he tries to take me away?" James felt a surge of anger at the thought, but he kept his voice steady and reassuring. "That's not going to happen," he said firmly. "I won't let him, and neither will your mom. We're going to protect you, Lily, no matter what." From the kitchen, Sarah had been quietly listening. She joined them on the couch, wrapping her arms around both James and Lily. "We're in this together," she said softly, her voice filled with love and determination. Lily looked between them, her eyes brimming with emotion. For the first time in days, a hint of relief flickered across her face. She nestled closer to James and Sarah, their protective embrace easing her fears. In that moment, James realized that their strength as a family wasn't just in the physical barriers he had set up, but in the love and unity they shared. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, and for Lily, that was the greatest reassurance of all. She spoke softly, her voice filled with love. "We're a family now, and we're going to stay together. No one is going to take you away from us." Lily looked at James and Sarah, her eyes searching their faces for reassurance. Seeing the determination and love in their expressions, the tension in her small body began to ease. Slowly, she nodded and whispered, "Okay," leaning into their embrace. "I believe you." The three of them stayed huddled together on the couch for a long time, drawing strength from one another. James felt a wave of protectiveness swell within him. This was his family, and he would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The next morning, James took another step to ensure their safety. He met with the lawyer, who assured him that the restraining order would be expedited. While it wasn't a perfect solution, it was another layer of protection, a way to keep the threat at bay. James also arranged for Sarah and Lily to have a panic button app installed on their phones, giving them a direct line to the authorities if they ever felt unsafe. It was a small gesture, but it provided a measure of comfort and helped ease the anxiety that had settled over them like a heavy cloud. As the days turned into weeks, the tension began to lift. The man who had threatened them didn't reappear, and the security measures James had put in place seemed to be working. Slowly, Lily began to regain her confidence. Her laughter returned, and the spark in her eyes began to shine again as she felt safer in her surroundings. One evening, after tucking Lily into bed, James and Sarah sat together on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The air was cool, carrying the promise of a fresh start, a new chapter. "I think she's starting to feel safe again," Sarah said softly, her hand resting on James's knee. "You've done so much to protect us, James. I don't know how to thank you." James shook his head, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "You don't need to thank me, Sarah. I'm just doing what I have to do, what any father would do." Sarah smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Not every father would go to these lengths. You've given her a sense of security she's never had before, and you've given me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago: hope." James turned to look at her, his heart swelling with emotion. "We've given each other hope," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "I found something with you and Lily that I never thought I'd have: a family, a purpose, and I'm not going to let anything take that away from us." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their journey settling between them. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but they had faced their fears and come out stronger on the other side. As the night deepened, they eventually made their way back inside, closing the balcony door behind them. The apartment felt warm and safe, a sanctuary from the outside world. James checked the locks one last time, more out of habit than necessity, before joining Sarah in bed. Lying there, listening to the quiet hum of the city and the soft breathing of the two people he loved most in the world, James felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. They were safe. They were together. And that was all that mattered. No matter what the future held, James knew they would face it as a family, and that knowledge gave him the strength to let go of the lingering fears and uncertainties. Together, they would build a future filled with love, hope, and the unshakable bond of their newfound family. They had found their way out of the darkness and were now stepping into the light. In that light, they would build a future filled with love, security, and the unbreakable bonds of a family that had fought hard to stay together. The weeks that followed marked a gradual return to normalcy. The heightened sense of fear that had gripped James, Sarah, and Lily began to fade, replaced by cautious optimism. The man who had threatened their peace had not returned, and with each passing day, they grew more confident that he wouldn't. Yet they knew it wasn't just the absence of danger that mattered. The real work lay in rebuilding the bonds that had been strained and tested. Lily, who had been shaken by everything that had happened, was slowly regaining her joyful spirit. The nightmares that had once plagued her became less frequent, and her laughter, light and infectious, began to fill the apartment again. James and Sarah both noticed the change, but they also understood that Lily still needed reassurance. Her world had been turned upside down more than once, and it would take time for her to fully trust in the stability they were working so hard to create. One Saturday morning, James decided it was time to do something special for Lily and Sarah, something to reinforce the sense of family they were building. He woke up early, made breakfast, and proposed a day out, just the three of them, away from the city to a place where they could relax and enjoy each other's company. "There's a park I used to go to when I was younger," James said, as they sat around the kitchen table, the smell of pancakes and syrup filling the air. "It's got wide open spaces, a lake, and plenty of room to run around. I thought we could pack a picnic and spend the day there." Lily's eyes lit up with excitement. "Can we bring a kite? I've never flown one before," she asked, her face bright with enthusiasm. James smiled, his heart swelling at her excitement. "Absolutely. We'll pick one up on the way." Sarah reached across the table and gave James's hand a squeeze. "That sounds perfect, James. We could all use a day like that." The morning was spent preparing for the outing. They packed a basket full of sandwiches, fruit, and treats, their energy shifting as they got ready. The tension that had hovered over them for so long seemed to be melting away, replaced by a lightness James hadn't felt in years. The drive to the park was filled with laughter and chatter. Lily, sitting in the back seat, talked nonstop about all the things she wanted to do. Fly the kite, explore the trails, maybe even dip her toes in the lake if it wasn't too cold. James listened with a smile, occasionally glancing at Sarah, who was watching Lily with a contented expression. For the first time in a long time, life felt normal. In fact, it felt better than normal. It felt right. When they arrived at the park, James was struck by how little it had changed since he'd last been there. The tall trees still lined the pathways, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. The lake shimmered under the sunlight, its surface calm and inviting. The wide open fields seemed perfect for running, playing, and, of course, flying a kite. They found a quiet spot near the lake, spreading out a blanket and setting up their picnic. Lily couldn't wait to try the kite they had picked up on the way. It was brightly colored with long tails that fluttered in the wind, and she was practically bouncing with excitement as James showed her how to get it ready for flight. "Okay, Lily, here's what you do," James explained, holding the kite steady while Lily stood a few feet away, gripping the string tightly. "You're going to start running, and when I say so, you let go of the kite and keep running. The wind will take care of the rest." Lily nodded, her face a picture of concentration. "I'm ready," Lily shouted, her face glowing with excitement. "All right," James said, feeling a thrill of excitement himself. "Go!" Lily took off, her small legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. James released the kite, and it soared into the air, its colorful tail streaming behind it. Lily glanced over her shoulder, her face breaking into a wide grin as she watched the kite climb higher and higher. "It's flying, Dad! It's really flying!" she yelled, her voice bursting with pure joy. James jogged over, laughing as he watched her run with the kite string tightly in her hands. Sarah joined them, clapping and cheering as Lily guided the kite with surprising skill for her very first try. They spent hours at the park, playing games, exploring the trails, and simply enjoying the beauty of the day. They walked along the edge of the lake, letting their feet brush against the cool water, and talked about everything and nothing at all. It was a day filled with simple pleasures, but for James, it was one of the most meaningful experiences he'd ever had. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, they returned to their picnic blanket. Together, they sat watching the sky turn brilliant shades of pink and orange. Lily leaned against James, her head resting on his shoulder, while Sarah sat close beside them, her hand entwined with James's. "This was the best day ever," Lily murmured sleepily, her eyes half closed. James kissed the top of her head, his heart overflowing with love and contentment. "I'm glad you had fun, sweetheart." Sarah smiled at them, her heart full as she looked at the two people she loved most in the world. "We should do this more often," she said softly. "Make it a tradition." James nodded, knowing that today had marked a turning point for them. The fear and uncertainty that had once dominated their lives were slowly giving way to something far better: hope, happiness, and the quiet joy of building a life together. As they packed up and headed back to the car, Lily's kite trailed behind them, fluttering gently in the breeze. James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: a deep, unshakable peace. The shadows of the past were finally beginning to fade, and in their place, a brighter future was starting to emerge. When they arrived home that evening, Lily went straight to bed, exhausted but happy. James and Sarah lingered in the living room, soaking in the quiet after a day filled with so much laughter and love. "I think today was a turning point," Sarah said, leaning against James as they sat together on the couch. "We're finding our way back to each other, back to what really matters." James wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "We are," he said firmly. "And I'm not going to let anything take that away from us. We've come too far." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "You've given us so much, James. You've given Lily the father she needed, and you've given me the hope I thought I'd lost." James smiled, holding her close as they sat in the warmth of their home. They had been through so much, but together, they were creating something stronger: a family built on love, trust, and the promise of a better future. James kissed her softly, feeling the depth of their connection in that simple gesture. "You've given me just as much, Sarah. We've given each other something real, something worth fighting for." They sat together in the quiet of their home, holding on to each other as the world outside faded away. The challenges they had faced were still there, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. They were a family, and they had proven that they could overcome anything as long as they stood together. As the night deepened and they finally went to bed, James felt a sense of completeness, as though all the scattered pieces of his life were finally coming together. They were building something beautiful, something lasting. For the first time, he truly believed they were going to be okay. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the light of their new beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the fragile peace James, Sarah, and Lily had worked so hard to build began to feel more secure. The joy of their recent outing lingered in their hearts, and the apartment was once again filled with laughter and love. It felt as though the worst was behind them, that the threats and shadows of the past had finally been banished. But just as they began to relax, believing they could move forward without looking back, the past came crashing back into their lives. It started with a phone call. James was at work, poring over documents, when his phone buzzed on the desk. The number was unfamiliar, but something told him he needed to answer. As soon as he heard the voice on the other end, his heart sank. "Mr. Carter," the voice said, cold and formal. "This is Detective Reynolds from the NYPD. We need to speak with you about a matter involving your family." James felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach. "What's this about, Detective?" "It's about the man who showed up at your home a few weeks ago," the detective replied. "We've received information that he may be planning to return. We believe he poses a serious threat, and we need to take precautions." James's mind raced as the detective explained the situation. The man had been spotted near their apartment building multiple times, watching, waiting. While he hadn't approached them yet, it was clear he hadn't given up. The restraining order was in place, but the detective made it clear that legal measures alone wouldn't stop him if he decided to act. "We're assigning an officer to monitor your building," Detective Reynolds continued, "but we recommend you take additional precautions. If there's anywhere else you can stay for a while, it might be safer." James felt a wave of anger and frustration. They had fought so hard to create a safe space for Lily, to give her a sense of stability and security. Now, all of that was being threatened again. Beneath the anger, though, was fear. A fear that, this time, the man might act on his threats. "Thank you, Detective," James said, his voice tight. "I'll take your advice." After hanging up, James leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. He needed to act quickly to protect his family before it was too late. But more than anything, he needed to talk to Sarah and figure out their next steps together. Leaving work early, his mind churned with worry as he drove home. When he walked through the door of their apartment, Sarah immediately sensed something was wrong. She was sitting at the kitchen table going through paperwork, but she set it aside the moment she saw his expression. "James, what happened?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. James took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as he explained the situation. "The man, he's been watching the building. The police think he might try something. They've assigned an officer to watch us, but they recommended we stay somewhere else for a while, just to be safe." Sarah's face went pale, and her hands trembled as she reached for him. "Oh my God, James, what are we going to do?" "Lily, she can't go through this again." "I know," James said, taking her hand and squeezing it gently, trying to reassure her. "We'll figure this out. We can stay at my father's house for a while. It's further out of the city, and it's more secure. He offered it to us after our last visit, just in case. I didn't want to take him up on it before, but now—" Sarah nodded, her eyes welling with tears. She hated the idea of uprooting Lily again, but she knew they had no choice. Their family's safety was the most important thing, and they needed to do whatever it took to protect it. "I hate this, James," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I hate that we have to keep running, that we can't just live our lives in peace." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I hate it too, Sarah," he whispered. "But we have to do what's best for Lily. We have to keep her safe, no matter what." They spent the next hour packing, their movements quick and purposeful. To avoid alarming Lily, they framed the sudden trip as a fun getaway to her grandfather's house. The excitement of the unexpected adventure brightened Lily's mood, her recent worries momentarily forgotten as she eagerly helped pack her favorite toys. As they loaded the car, James paused to take one last look at their apartment building, a place that had become more than just a home. It had been their sanctuary. The thought of leaving it behind, even temporarily, filled him with a heavy sadness. But he knew they had no other choice. They had to keep moving forward to protect the life they had worked so hard to rebuild. The drive to his father's estate was quiet, the weight of the situation hanging heavily in the air. Sarah reached over, her hand resting gently on James's. She gave him a small, reassuring smile. "We're going to be okay," she said softly. "We'll get through this." James nodded, squeezing her hand in return. "We will. We just have to stay strong. For Lily." When they arrived at the estate, James's father was already waiting for them. He had taken the news seriously, arranging for increased security around the property. As they pulled up to the grand house, James felt a surprising sense of relief. The estate was large, secluded, and well protected. It felt like a place where they could finally breathe. Lily was the first to leap out of the car, her earlier excitement returning in full force as she raced toward the sprawling gardens. Her laughter echoed through the air as she explored, her delight bringing a brief smile to James's face. Meanwhile, he and Sarah began unloading the car, their movements careful but efficient. James's father approached them, his expression grim but resolute. "I've made sure everything is secure," he said in a low voice. "You're safe here. Stay as long as you need." James nodded, his gratitude evident. "Thank you. I wasn't sure we'd have to take you up on this, but I'm glad it's an option." His father placed a firm hand on James's shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. "Your family," he said simply. "We'll get through this together." As they settled into the estate, the tension began to ease, replaced by a tentative sense of security. Lily quickly adjusted to the new surroundings, her days filled with exploring the expansive gardens and discovering hidden corners of the vast house. For her, it was an adventure, a welcome distraction from the fears that had haunted her. For James and Sarah, however, it was a time of reflection and planning. They spent long evenings on the estate's terrace, talking through their options, considering their next steps. James knew they couldn't stay at the estate forever, but he also knew they couldn't return to their apartment until they were absolutely certain the threat was gone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah turned to James, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think we should move?" she asked softly. "Find a new place. Somewhere he won't know to look for us?" James sighed, his gaze shifting to the garden where Lily was playing in the fading light. The thought of uprooting their lives yet again weighed heavily on him, but he knew Sarah might be right. Their safety and Lily's happiness was worth whatever sacrifices they needed to make. James considered her words carefully, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "It might be the best option," he admitted after a pause. "But I don't want to uproot Lily again unless we absolutely have to. She's already been through so much." "I know," Sarah said, her voice tinged with concern. "But I don't want to live in fear, James. I want her to have a normal life. A life where she doesn't have to keep looking over her shoulder." James sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Maybe it's time," he said quietly. "Time for a fresh start. Somewhere new, where we can finally put all of this behind us." Sarah nodded, a sense of determination settling in her features. "Then that's what we'll do," she said firmly. "We'll find a new place, and we'll start over, together." As they sat on the terrace, watching the sky shift from shades of orange to a deep, calming blue, James felt a renewed sense of resolve. They had faced so many challenges already, and they had come through each one stronger than before. This was just one more obstacle to overcome. "We'll get through this," James said, his voice steady. "And when we do, we'll build something even better. A new home, a new life. A place where we can finally be at peace." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft but full of conviction. "I believe that, James. We've come too far to let anything tear us apart now." As the stars began to twinkle overhead, James felt a calmness wash over him. The past had tried to haunt them, but they weren't the same people they had been before. They were stronger now, more united. Together, they could face anything. They had walked through darkness before, and each time, they had found their way back to the light. This time would be no different. The decision to move marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. After weeks of searching, James and Sarah found a house in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. A charming two-story home surrounded by tall trees and a spacious yard. It was private, peaceful, and felt like the perfect place to build the life they had been fighting for. The moment they stepped inside, they knew it was where they were meant to be. Packing up the apartment, though, was bittersweet. It had been the place where their family had begun to heal, where James had found his footing as a father, and where he and Sarah had rebuilt their relationship piece by piece. Lily, ever resilient, approached the move with her usual enthusiasm. She was eager to explore her new room, pick out paint colors, and turn the house into a home. On the day of the move, James stood in the empty apartment one last time, letting the memories flood over him. This was where it had all started, where he had brought Lily after finding her lost and alone, where they had started to create something beautiful. It was where he had discovered what it truly meant to be a father and had rediscovered the love he shared with Sarah. "We're ready," Sarah said softly, coming up beside him. She slipped her hand into his and gave it a gentle squeeze. "It's time for a fresh start." James nodded, turning to look at her. "I know, this is the right thing, for all of us." They closed the door to the apartment for the last time and began the drive to their new home. The weight of the past seemed to lift as they moved closer to their future, leaving behind the shadows that had once loomed so large. When they arrived, Lily was the first to leap from the car, her excitement contagious as she raced to explore the house. Her laughter echoed through the empty rooms, filling the space with life and hope. "This is going to be great, Dad," she called out, her voice brimming with excitement. "I can't wait to decorate my room." James smiled as he watched her, warmth spreading through him at the sight of his daughter, so happy, so full of life. At that moment, he knew they were finally where they were meant to be. A new chapter was beginning, and it was filled with possibility. Together, they would make this house a home, a place where they could thrive, safe and surrounded by love. "We're going to make it exactly how you want it, Lily," James said with a smile. "This is your space, your home." The next few days were a whirlwind of unpacking, organizing, and settling into their new life. James and Sarah worked side by side, transforming the house into a space that truly felt like theirs. They painted walls in warm, inviting colors, hung pictures that told their story, and carefully arranged furniture until everything felt just right. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel like home. A safe, welcoming space where they could relax and enjoy the simple joys of life. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, they decided to take a well-deserved break and have a family movie night. The three of them piled onto the couch, with Lily nestled snugly between James and Sarah under a soft blanket. While the movie played in the background, James found himself focusing less on the screen and more on the warmth of his family beside him. This was the life he had always wanted, a life filled with love, comfort, and belonging. As the credits rolled, Lily drifted off to sleep against James's side, her breathing soft and steady. He glanced down at her, his heart swelling with pride and love. Gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, he marveled at how much she had grown and how far they had come as a family. "She's so happy here," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We all are." James nodded, his eyes never leaving Lily. "This is where we're meant to be," he said quietly. "We've been through so much, but we're stronger now because of it." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder and let out a contented sigh. "We found our place, James, our home." The next morning, they woke to the cheerful sound of birds chirping outside their window. Sunlight poured through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the house. It felt like the beginning of something new, something beautiful. They spent the day exploring their new neighborhood, meeting the friendly neighbors, and discovering a nearby park where Lily could spend her afternoons playing. The sense of community was immediate, and they were welcomed with open arms. It was everything they had hoped for. A safe, nurturing environment where Lily could grow up feeling loved and supported. That evening, as the sun set in vibrant shades of pink and orange, they decided to have dinner on the back porch. James grilled burgers while Sarah set the table, and Lily ran around the yard, laughing as she played with a ball she'd found in the garage. When they finally sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, filled with stories of the day and bursts of laughter. It was in those small, everyday moments that James found the most joy. Moments that reminded him just how far they had come and how much they had to look forward to. After dinner, they stayed on the porch, watching as the stars began to dot the night sky. Lily curled up in Sarah's lap, her eyes heavy with sleep, but determined to stay awake as long as she could. "Can we do this every night?" she asked, drowsily. James reached over and stroked her hair, smiling. "We can do this as often as you want, Lily. This is our home now. We can make our own traditions." Lily nodded, her eyes closing as she snuggled deeper into Sarah's arms. "I love it here," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Dad. I love you, Mom." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at James, and he felt a lump rise in his throat. This was what they had fought for, what they had dreamed of during the darkest moments. This feeling of peace, love, and family. "We love you too, sweetheart," James whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "More than anything." As Lily drifted off to sleep, James and Sarah stayed on the porch, holding each other close in the quiet of the night. They had weathered the storm and now stood together in the light of a new beginning. Their new home was more than just a house. It was their safe haven, their sanctuary. They knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. The past had tried to pull them apart, But instead, it had brought them closer. It had made them stronger. And as they sat there under the starlit sky, they knew they had everything they needed to build a beautiful, happy life. One filled with love, laughter, and the unbreakable bonds of family. This was their new beginning, and they were ready to embrace it, together. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about family, resilience, and love, don't forget to like the video, share your favorite part in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this beautiful journey.